Act 1, Cold Hook, 0 o'clock, 0:30. 3 weeks into my assignment, I played back a routine microphone calibration recording I'd made on my first day at the station. It was 4 seconds long. My voice, the date, the location. Standard procedure. But at the 2-second mark, between July and field station, there is a frequency burst that wasn't there when I recorded it. It lasts 0.3 seconds. It falls in the 45 kilohertz range. I know that range. I've spent 7 years studying it. That is the range where bats call out into the dark to find each other. The difference is, bats use that signal to locate something. Whatever added that frequency to my recording had already found me. Cut to black. Act 2, Grounding. My name is Dr. Marin Solis, and until last spring I was a tenure-track acoustic ecologist at Northern Plains State University. I study bat populations. Specifically, I record and analyze their ultrasonic calls, the frequencies they use to navigate, hunt, and communicate. And I use those recordings to track colony health, migration patterns, and habitat viability. It is painstaking, solitary work. You spend a lot of time alone in the dark, listening to things you cannot hear without a machine. When Dr. Aldrich Tran stopped responding to the university's emails in March, the department assumed burnout. He'd been stationed at Ridgetop Field Station, a single-room research cabin in the subarctic boreal of northern Manitoba, for 14 months. 14 months of solo fieldwork, with intermittent satellite internet and no lab partners. The assumption wasn't unreasonable. It happened to people. I'd seen it happen. I was assigned to fly in, recover his 14 months of acoustic data from the equipment array, continue the bat survey for the remaining 6 weeks of the colony's active season, and fly back out, a recovery and continuation posting. 6 weeks solo. I'd done 4-week solo postings before. I said yes without hesitation. The cabin smelled like pine resin, damp insulation, and something sharper underneath, like ozone, or the inside of an old battery pack. That smell hit me when I opened the door, and it never fully went away, no matter how many times I aired the place out. I assumed it was the equipment. The acoustic monitoring array was extensive. 8 external microphones on telescoping poles, arranged in a 30-meter arc outside the cabin, each feeding into a processing rack on the main work table that filled nearly an entire wall. The rack hummed constantly, a low-frequency vibration I felt more in my sternum than heard with my ears. Within a day, I stopped registering it consciously. It became the silence. Tran's field notes covered 3 yellow legal pads stacked on the windowsill, weighted down by a smooth piece of grey shale. His handwriting was small and disciplined in the early pages. Consistent. Meticulous species breakdowns, colony size estimates, nightly activity logs. Exactly what I would have written. I recognized his methodology. We'd overlapped at a conference in 2021 and spent an afternoon agreeing about nearly everything. He was careful, precise. He was good at this work. I set his notes aside and started on the data. 14 months, 347 nights of audio across 8 microphones. I loaded the first files and began. Act 3, Escalating Dread, approximately 4 o'clock tension spike. I worked chronologically. The first 8 months were exactly what Tran's written notes described. Healthy Myotis lucifugus colony, consistent nightly foraging behavior, seasonal patterns aligning cleanly with the literature. I flagged a few anomalies worth noting in the final report. Standard findings. Nothing unusual. Month 9 was where his written notes began to change. The printed entries remained clinical. Colony count, weather conditions, equipment status readings. But in the margins, in a slightly looser version of his handwriting, as though he were writing faster, or in the dark, or with one eye on something else, there were annotations. Asterisk subject returns nightly. That was the first one. squeezed next to a routine colony size estimate for the 12th of October. I assumed subject referred to an individual bat he was tracking. Field researchers name their subjects, give them designations. I moved on. 2 weeks later, in the margin beside a weather entry, asterisk subject does not appear in thermal. I paused on that one. The station's array included a thermal sensor for corroborating acoustic data with heat signatures. If a bat was large enough and warm enough, it registered. If it didn't appear in thermal, it was either very small, far too small to produce the signal I was seeing in the acoustic files, or it wasn't warm. 3 days after that, in letters small enough that I had to hold the page at an angle to read them, asterisk, distinct spatial awareness. Subject navigates without vocalizing. Subject is not echolocating. Subject is listening. I set the legal pad down. Echolocation is the entire basis of this work. A bat calls out a burst of ultrasonic frequency and reads the returning echo to build a three-dimensional map of its environment. Call, echo, navigation. That's the mechanism. If something was navigating the forest around that microphone array without vocalizing, it wasn't using echolocation. It was using something else entirely, or it was already oriented, already familiar with the terrain, already knew the space. I pulled up the acoustic files for that week and started scanning. Approximately 8 o'clock tension spike. It took me nearly 4 hours to find what I was looking for. When I found it, I sat with it for a long time before I allowed myself to understand what I was seeing. In standard bat echolocation data, you get a clean call and response pair, the outgoing burst and the returning echo, separated by a precise time interval. The interval tells you the distance to whatever reflected the signal, like sonar. The math is simple. Distance equals time times speed of sound, divided by 2. Call goes out, echo comes back. You measure the gap, and you know where everything is. In Tran's month 9 recordings, I was finding calls without returns. Not because the bats were calling into empty space. Empty space still produces a faint echo off distant surfaces. Trees, rock, ground. The call would go out and then the waveform would simply flatten. Not silence exactly, not interference. Flat. As if the signal had been absorbed. Sound does not get absorbed by open air. Sound gets absorbed by mass, by density, by a surface that does not reflect. Something had been standing between the microphones. Something with enough physical presence to intercept the bat's outgoing signals before they could reach a reflective surface. And it gave nothing back. On the data, it was a hole, a region where the acoustic field simply ceased. The bat's calls went into it and stopped existing. I checked the thermal logs for the same timestamps. Nothing. Not a cold anomaly, not a heat signature. The thermal sensor registered an empty field. I went outside and stood next to the microphone array for a long time. It was 2 in the afternoon and fully bright. I could see clearly in every direction for 30 meters. Pine forest, sedge grass, a ridge of grey rock to the north, nothing else. I went back inside. That night I slept with the interior door latch bolted. Approximately 12 o'clock tension spike. Over the next 2 weeks of data, I found the absorption signatures appearing every night. Every night, sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning, for an interval ranging from 12 minutes to just over an hour. I began charting the positions, triangulating which microphones registered the absorption effect and which did not, plotting where in the arc the hole was opening each night. It was never in the same position twice, but it was always between the microphones and the cabin, always between the array and me. I started checking the physical positions of the microphone poles each morning. Tran's placement sketch in hand, compass bearings, distances from the cabin door, extension heights, exactly as he'd drawn them on the back cover of the first legal pad. I walked the full arc every day, On the morning of my 18th day, I found that 2 of the poles had been moved, not fallen, not wind-shifted. The telescoping poles had been deliberately adjusted, one extended an additional 30 centimeters, the other rotated approximately 45 degrees on its base mount. I took compass bearings on both of them and stood there in the cold morning air working through the geometry. Both were pointing at the east-facing cabin window, the window where I sat every night to work, with the light on. I had not adjusted them. I went through every night of my time at the station, every time I had been outdoors after dark. I had touched exactly 2 of the 8 microphones since my arrival, both on the south side of the array, both still in their original positions. Something else had moved them, in the night, while I was inside. I filed a satellite message to the university that afternoon. Equipment repositioned, possible trespasser in the survey area, requesting welfare check or extraction option. The reply came 6 hours later. Asterisk noted. No other registered personnel in your grid square. Nearest active camp 200 plus kilometers south. Check for animal interference. Black bears have displaced sensor equipment in this region before. Advise if situation deteriorates. Bears. I looked at the photographs I'd taken of the pole bases. The adjustment had been made at the locking collar, a threaded metal ring you turn by hand to fix the extension at a desired height. The metal was clean, no claw marks, no scratches. The thread showed no damage. No animal had touched those poles. Act 4. Peak crisis. 90-second maximum intensity payoff. I made a decision. I was going to listen to the final night of Tran's recordings, the last night before his communications went permanently dark, in real time. Not through the spectral analysis viewer, through the cabin speakers, at normal playback speed, from midnight to dawn. I was going to sit in that cabin and hear it the way he would have heard it if he'd been awake. I started playback at 11 p.m. and worked at my laptop while it ran. The first 2 hours were ordinary. Colony data, foraging peaks, the bats working the northern tree line. Nothing remarkable. At 2:17 a.m. the absorption signature appeared. I recognized it immediately in the frequency display, the colony diverting south, calls clustering away from the north quadrant as something opened up in the middle of the arc, the hole in the data. At 2:31 a.m., Tran spoke. He wasn't supposed to be on this recording. Field researchers don't narrate their audio files. There was no reason for his voice to be in this data. But he spoke, quietly, in the tone you use when you are trying very hard not to be heard by something nearby. He said, "It's at the window again. East window. It doesn't come in. It just... Asterisk." And then he stopped. 38 seconds of silence. Silence 3. The colony calls returned slowly, filling back into the north quadrant, as if something had withdrawn. The absorption signature closed at 3:04 a.m. Tran did not speak again for the rest of the night. I sat in the dark after the recording ended, and I did not move for a long time. Then I looked at the east window, the window I was sitting beside, the window the 2 repositioned microphones had been rotated to aim at. My laptop screen was the only light in the cabin. I looked at the glow it cast on the glass, and I thought about what it must look like from the outside. A lit rectangle in a dark field, visible from 30 meters in every direction, every night, for 18 days. I turned the screen off. In the dark, I listened. The equipment rack hummed its low, bone-deep vibration. Outside, faintly, the bats were working the tree line, their calls inaudible to me but registering on the passive display as small, clean, reciprocal arcs. Calls going out, echoes returning. Then one arc disappeared, then 2 more. The north quadrant emptied on the display. The absorption signature opened like pressure building behind my eyes. It was outside, right now. In this moment, while I sat 3 feet from the east window in the dark, It was outside. I did not breathe. I watched the frequency display, and I counted my heartbeats, and I did not move for 22 minutes. At 3:01 a.m., the colony returned to the northern quadrant. The absorption signature closed. I turned my laptop screen back on with hands that were not steady. I opened the satellite messenger and typed one sentence. Asterisk, I need extraction. Not in 6 weeks. Now. Only then, in the screen's light, did I look at the window properly. There was a contact mark on the outside of the glass. Not a handprint, nothing with that legible a shape. A smear, the way a surface leaves a mark when pressed flush against glass. Smooth, featureless. No breath fog at the edges. Whatever it was, it had been standing against my window, in the dark, while I sat 3 feet away. I did not go outside that night. Act 5. Unresolved Aftermath. In the morning, I found the note. I had worked at that equipment rack for 18 days, and I had not found it because it was folded twice and tucked behind the cooling fan housing at the back of the rack, the one place you would only reach if you needed to pull the rack away from the wall for a hardware fault. I found it because the power supply failed on the 23rd day, and I had to pull the entire rack to get to the back panel. It was written on a strip torn from a legal pad in tight, careful handwriting. It was not dated. Asterisk. It learned my name from the recordings. Listened to months of me saying it, in log entries, in calibration checks, in the idle habit of talking to yourself when you've been alone too long. By the time I understood what it was doing, it already knew how to locate me specifically, not just the cabin. Me. I think the name is how it begins, how it orients. I think familiarity is what it needs before it can do whatever comes after familiarity. I don't know what comes after. I only know what comes before. Weeks of it outside at night, learning you, getting close, getting specific. Asterisk, do not say your name out loud. Do not say your name into a recording. If you already have, I'm sorry. I don't know what that means for you. I only know what it meant for me. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it has already begun. My extraction flight arrived 4 days later. I did not sleep in the cabin again. I stayed in my truck with the engine running and every light on, and I did not turn them off until the plane was in the air. I have filed my report. I listed the absorption signatures as an unclassified acoustic anomaly, possible equipment artifact, recommend follow-up study. I do not know what else I would write. They have not sent anyone back to Ridgetop. They have not found Tran. What I have not told anyone, what I have not been able to say out loud, because saying it out loud feels like a door swinging open in the dark, is what I found when I played back that first calibration recording one final time. The one I made on day 1, 4 seconds, my voice, the date, the location, standard check. At the 2-second mark, between my name and the rest of the sentence, there is a 0.3 second burst in the 45 kilohertz range. I have run it through every analysis tool I have. It is not an artifact. It is not interference. It is a structured signal with internal pattern. It repeats within itself at a regular interval, the way a signal only does when it has traveled out and come back. In BAT echolocation data, a return echo means the signal bounced off a surface. Something reflected my name. Something that was already inside that cabin before I arrived, on the first morning, before I had unpacked a single piece of equipment. Something that heard my name once and sent a signal back at the microphone so precise and so clean that 7 years of training left me no other interpretation. It was already there. It had already begun. I have been home for 6 weeks. 3 nights ago, my neighbor's dog stopped going into the yard after dark. She told me it started sitting at the fence line and barking at nothing. Then it stopped barking, and now it won't go near the door at all. I am trying not to think about what that means. I am trying not to think about my apartment window, the east-facing one, or about the fact that last night I was sitting at my desk when I heard something just outside it. Not a knock, not a scrape, not anything I can name. A sound that felt like the moment before a sound. Pressure, the shape of something present. I haven't checked the glass yet. I need to check the glass. I can't make myself get up and look.